My name is Amelia, and this story begins with the kind of shock that shatters your sense of belonging in one heartbeat. I had just finished midterms and driven 4 long hours from my university back to Bakersfield for spring break. I was tired but excited. You know that feeling when you replay in your mind the comfort of home, your old room, the smell of familiar walls, the tree-lined street where you grew up. That's what I expected when I turned into my neighborhood. But instead of comfort, I saw a nightmare waiting for me. There was a for sale sign hammered right into the front lawn of my childhood home. The curtains were gone from the windows. The living room looked stripped bare. My pulse spiked as I parked in the driveway. Then I noticed them 3 large black garbage bags sitting on the porch. At first I thought maybe the new owners had dumped trash outside. But when I pulled one open, my stomach dropped. Inside were my clothes, my books, my old sketch pad with torn edges. Everything that used to tell me I belonged here, stuffed into plastic bags like discarded trash. I froze on the steps, knuckles white, as I gripped my phone. I dialed my Uncle Thomas in disbelief. "The house is empty," I whispered, as though saying it out loud might make it untrue. His voice on the other end was hesitant, almost guilty. "Your parents moved last week. Didn't they tell you?" My chest tightened. No, they didn't tell me anything. When I finally called my father, he answered with a voice colder than I had ever heard before. "We moved. You're an adult now. Deal with it." Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, numb, pressing redial again and again. Straight to voicemail. I tried my mother's number. Nothing. I tried my younger brother. No answer. Just silence. Standing in front of that house, I realized something gut-wrenching. I had been erased, not only from that property, but from my family's life. No warning, no goodbye, not even the dignity of a forwarding address. It felt like the ground beneath me had given way. The sun dipped low behind the rooftops, painting long shadows across the front yard. The maple tree I had planted with my father when I was 8 still stood tall, its branches reaching toward a home that no longer belonged to us. That tree had been a symbol of family, of roots. Now it mocked me, with its resilience reminding me of everything that had just been ripped away. I dragged the garbage bags to my car, tears burning but refusing to fall. I wasn't going to cry, not yet. Instead, I carried them like broken pieces of myself and shoved them into the trunk. My childhood didn't deserve to rot on a stranger's porch. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel. The scratchy bedspread became my stage for a cruel display of what was left of my life. A few textbooks, some winter clothes, a broken picture frame holding the last family photo we had taken together, everyone smiling, everyone pretending. Staring at it, the truth cut through me like glass. They had abandoned me without a second thought. But something inside me hardened that night. If they had decided to erase me, then I would erase the power they had over my future. I made a vow to myself, lying in that dim motel room with the buzzing neon light outside the window. I would not chase them. I would not beg. I would not cling to the illusion that family was forever. If they believed I was disposable, then I would build a life so solid, so unshakable, that they would never again hold the power to define me. This was no longer about belonging to them. It was about belonging to myself. And so began the journey that would change everything. When I woke up the next morning in that cramped motel room, reality hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't a dream. My home was gone. My family was gone. And I was alone with nothing but a few garbage bags, filled with scraps of a childhood that no longer existed. I stared at the cracked ceiling, replaying my father's voice in my mind. "You're an adult now. Deal with it." The words were like barbed wire around my heart. My parents had decided that my adulthood was the perfect excuse to discard me. No explanation, no warning, no kindness. I remember clutching my phone, my hands trembling as I tried calling again. My father didn't pick up. My mother didn't answer. Even my brother ignored me. For the first time in my life, I realized there was no safety net beneath me. I wasn't part of their family anymore. The truth was unbearable, but I forced myself to breathe through it. If I broke down now, I knew I might not recover. So instead, I went numb. I loaded up my car with the garbage bags, checked out of the motel, and drove aimlessly around town, hoping for answers that wouldn't come. I stopped outside the grocery store I used to visit with my mom, the one where she would hold my hand when I was little, telling me to stay close. I sat in the car and thought, was it all fake? Were all those moments just illusions, meant to keep me loyal until they didn't need me anymore? I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock on every door in Bakersfield and demand that someone explain how parents could abandon their daughter like she was nothing. But deep down, I knew the only explanation was cruelly simple. They had chosen to move on without me. And yet as I sat there, another thought surfaced. If they could move forward, so could I. Maybe this was my chance to create a life of my own, independent and unshakable. But let me pause here for a second, because I need to ask you something. Have you ever been blindsided by the very people you trusted most? The ones you thought would always be there, suddenly turning their backs and leaving you to fend for yourself. If you have, you know that kind of betrayal burns deeper than any stranger's wound. If you're listening to this and it resonates, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share if you've ever felt this kind of abandonment. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, raw, unfiltered, and real, don't forget to hit subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is only the beginning. That night, after circling around town, I ended up back at the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to delete every contact, erase them as they had erased me. Another part of me clung to hope, whispering, maybe they'll call. Maybe this is a mistake. But the silence stretched on. The motel walls felt like they were closing in. The air was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of questions I couldn't answer. Why had they left me behind? Why hadn't they at least told me what had I done to deserve this? As night fell, I realized there was no going back. I couldn't force myself into a family that had already decided I didn't belong. I had two choices: let this destroy me or let it fuel me. So I chose fuel. I lay down, pulled the thin blanket over my shoulders, and whispered a promise into the darkness. If they wanted me gone, then I would disappear from their world completely. But I wouldn't disappear into nothingness. I would build a life so strong, so undeniable, that no one, especially them, could ever reduce me to a garbage bag on a porch again. It was the first time I felt a flicker of control since everything fell apart, and that flicker would soon ignite into something much bigger. The following days blurred together a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. I tried to keep busy, but every small detail around town reminded me of what I had lost. The diner where my family used to eat on Sundays. The park where my brother and I had played tag. Even the gas station down the road where my father once taught me how to check the oil in my car. Everywhere I turned, there were ghosts of a life I could no longer touch. I drove past the house again once, just once. I thought maybe it would make me feel closer to them, or at least help me understand. But the sight only cut deeper. The curtains gone, the room's hollow, the realtor's lockbox hanging from the front door. It was no longer my home, and I was no longer their daughter. That truth was final. But I kept replaying one thought: why me? I was the one who had done everything right. I studied hard, maintained nearly perfect grades, stayed out of trouble, even sent part of my scholarship money home to help them. And yet I was the one they tossed aside. Meanwhile, my younger brother Gabriel, the one who struggled in school, who got caught shoplifting, who spent his nights on video games instead of homework, he was still under their roof, still wrapped in their protection. That comparison ate at me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was injustice. They had abandoned the child who gave them everything, but held tight to the one who gave them nothing but problems. And that question haunted me. Why was I never enough? Lying awake in the motel at night, I thought about the sacrifices they always reminded us of. We came here with nothing, so you could have everything. Those words had been repeated like gospel at our dinner table. Education was my ticket. Success was supposed to be the return on their investment. So why discard me right when I was delivering on that promise? The answer was something I might never know. And maybe that was the cruelest part, realizing that I could twist myself in knots trying to explain their actions, but I would never get the truth. And maybe I didn't need it. That realization was slow, like dawn breaking after a long night. Yes, my parents had betrayed me. Yes, they had favored my brother, but none of that had to define me anymore. I couldn't live my life seeking their approval when they had already proven they would never give it. Still, I wonder, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have gone back to that door? Demanded answers, begged them to let you in? Or would you have walked away, cut all ties, and started over from scratch? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know. If you've ever felt like the scapegoat while someone else was treated like the golden child, your story matters here. We learn from each other, and maybe your experience can help someone else who's watching. For me, the decision became clearer each day. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that trying to win back people who didn't value me was like pouring water into a broken vase. No matter how much I gave it, would never be enough to fill the cracks. So I stopped calling, I stopped waiting, and I started planning. I didn't know exactly what was ahead, but I knew I had to build something new. Something that wasn't dependent on their approval, their pride, or their money. Something that was mine alone. The motel room became my temporary base. I spread out my textbooks across the bed, turned on the lamp, and began drafting plans for the future. My hands shook with both fear and excitement. Fear because the safety net was gone. Excitement because for the first time, the path ahead was mine to carve. It was painful, it was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I whispered to myself one night as if sealing a promise they may have chosen him over me. But I will choose myself, and that choice will be enough. That was the moment I began to shift. And soon the universe would send me the help I needed to turn that choice into reality. The motel nights dragged on, but the anger inside me sharpened into something I could no longer ignore. I kept asking myself over and over why him and not me. Gabriel had always been the one in trouble, skipping assignments, sneaking out at night, even getting caught with stolen headphones at the mall. Yet my parents defended him every single time. He's just finding his way, they'd say, brushing off his mistakes like dust on a table. But me, I was the reliable one. The quiet daughter who studied while others partied. The girl who spent summers interning at the courthouse while friends worked at the mall. The one who sent scholarship money home each month to ease their bills. And still, I was the one discarded. The injustice made my chest burn. I sat on the edge of that motel bed and thought about every lecture my father had ever given me. We came here with nothing, so you could have everything. It was practically his mantra. Every late night, every second job, every reminder of their sacrifices was wrapped in that line. I lived my life to honor those sacrifices. And when it finally mattered, they shoved me aside as if none of it had ever counted. I replayed Gabriel's smirk in my mind, the way he would shrug when caught, knowing Mom and Dad would shield him. Maybe that was why their betrayal blindsided me so completely. Because deep down, I thought they valued my responsibility, my dedication. But no. They valued him, the reckless one, the problem child. And I was expendable. It's one thing to feel unloved. It's another to realize you were always the backup plan, the one they leaned on only when it was convenient. That realization nearly crushed me, but it also lit something inside me. If my parents thought Gabriel deserved their loyalty more than I did, fine, they could keep him, because I was done begging for scraps of affection. One night, staring at the cracked motel ceiling, I asked myself, what if this was freedom? The idea was terrifying, but also intoxicating. No more chasing approval, no more trying to prove my worth, no more bending myself into shapes just to earn a nod of approval that never came. For the first time, I considered the possibility that being discarded wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of one I could write myself. But let's be real, that clarity didn't come without pain. There were moments when the weight of abandonment nearly suffocated me, when I wanted nothing more than to hear my mother's voice saying she was proud, when I wished my father would just call back, even if it was only to argue. Silence is its own kind of violence, and it echoed in every corner of that motel room. I curled up some nights clutching that broken photo frame, the one with our family smiling on the beach. Everyone looked happy in that picture, but now I couldn't tell if they were smiling at me or past me. The bitterness crept in, whispering that I had been nothing but a placeholder until Gabriel was ready to carry their dreams. But bitterness alone couldn't build a future. So I made a choice. If they saw me as disposable, then I would take that disposability and turn it into strength. I would not crumble. I would not vanish. I would carve out a life so undeniable, so unshakable, that their rejection would become the very fuel for my rise. That vow was the only thing that steadied me. And though I didn't know it, then life was about to send me someone who would help turn that vow into reality. Because sometimes, when your blood family erases you, the universe delivers another kind of family, the ones who choose you and the ones you choose back. And my first glimpse of that new family came sooner than I expected. The turning point came on a night when exhaustion weighed heavy, yet my mind refused to rest. I sat on the thin motel mattress surrounded by textbooks and crumpled notes. My eyes lingered on the broken picture frame I'd pulled from one of the garbage bags, the one with my family smiling at the beach 3 summers ago. Their faces looked warm, loving, protective. But now, staring at that photo, all I could see was betrayal. I whispered to myself, if they wanted me gone, I will stay gone, but I won't vanish. I'll rise. The very next morning, I made a decision. I packed up my few belongings, stuffed them back into the trunk of my car, and headed toward campus, even though spring break wasn't over. I had nowhere else to go, but something inside me told me I needed to be closer to the place where my future lived. And that's when the first real light broke through the storm. I reached out to Professor Wilkins, my constitutional law instructor. She had always seen me in a way my parents never did. When she picked up, I couldn't hold my composure anymore. My voice cracked as I explained what had happened. There was a pause on the other end. Then her words came steady and calm. They just left you, Jasmine. Listen to me. Come stay with me until the dorms reopen. We'll figure this out together. I can still remember pulling into her driveway, nerves buzzing heart-heavy. Her Victorian house stood tall with ivy curling around the porch rails, books stacked visible through the front windows. When she opened the door, the smell of old wood and tea drifted out. 2 elderly cats meandered lazily across the hallway. She handed me a spare key and said, "No time limit. This is your home for as long as you need. Focus on your studies." It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like life itself had been handed back to me. That night I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, not the cracked motel ceiling, but one painted soft cream. It felt safe. For the first time since everything collapsed, I didn't feel like I was drowning. Someone had chosen me, not because they had to, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely cared. Her faith sparked something inside me, and that spark told me I had to do more than just survive. I would rebuild, and I would make sure my story wasn't just about abandonment, but about resilience. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If someone opened their home and heart to you at your lowest moment, how would you repay that kindness? Would you carry it forward, channel it into something bigger? Or would you hide from the world, too afraid to risk more pain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear how you would face that crossroad, because your answer might guide someone else who feels lost right now. And if stories of rebuilding and resilience matter to you, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them most. Back in that warm guest room, I promised myself I would not waste this chance. Professor Wilkins had thrown me a lifeline, but it was up to me to climb back to the surface. So I did what I had always done best. I studied. I read cases deep into the night, highlighting passages until my hands cramped. I helped her organize her research files. I cooked small meals in her kitchen just to repay her kindness in some way. The rhythm of daily life steadied me, kept me from spiraling into anger or despair. But beneath that rhythm there was a fire growing, a need to transform this pain into purpose. I didn't yet know how, but I knew my story wasn't going to end with garbage bags on a porch. Something bigger was waiting for me, and soon I would find it. Living with Professor Wilkins was like stepping into another universe. Her home smelled faintly of lavender and old books, and every room was lined with shelves that seemed to breathe wisdom. She moved gently, spoke thoughtfully, and had a way of making silence feel safe rather than suffocating. For someone like me, freshly discarded, still raw from betrayal, that safety was priceless. She didn't press for details beyond what I shared. She didn't pity me. Instead, she encouraged me to channel my pain into something productive. The best advocacy comes from personal experience, she said one night over tea, her eyes steady behind wire-rimmed glasses. I nodded, clutching the warm mug between my palms, knowing she was right. During that spring break, instead of collapsing under the weight of what had happened, I buried myself in research. I sat for hours at her oak dining table, surrounded by stacks of case law and statutes. Every page I turned reminded me why I had chosen pre-law in the first place. Justice mattered to me not because it was abstract, but because I knew what injustice felt like. When the semester resumed, Professor Wilkins connected me to a summer legal internship at Riverton Law Partners, a firm that specialized in housing discrimination cases. The irony wasn't lost on me. After being thrown out like unwanted clutter, I was about to work for a firm fighting for people who had lost their homes. Walking into Riverton on my first day, I carried a folder and a heart pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. The office smelled faintly of coffee and toner. Attorneys bustled through hallways with case files clutched under their arms. I was given a small desk in the corner and a pile of documents to review. At first, my tasks were basic filing, organizing, running to fetch coffee. But soon, my supervisors noticed something in me. One afternoon, I sat with a young mother who had just received an eviction notice. Her hands shook as she clutched her baby, her eyes darting to the door, as though someone might drag her out at any second. Instead of rushing through intake questions, I listened, really listened. She cried, she raged, she feared, and I held that space for her. Later that evening, my supervisor, attorney Eleanor Grayson, stopped by my desk. "You have something rare, Jasmine," she said quietly. "You actually listen. That matters." Her words landed in a place inside me that had been hollow for months. For the first time since being abandoned, I felt seen for who I was not, for what I could provide. The work at Riverton consumed me, but in a good way. Every story I heard resonated with my own, even if the circumstances were different. Students with predatory landlords, elderly tenants pushed out by developers, families offered 2 weeks in a motel as compensation for losing their homes. Every file I touched carried echoes of my own experience, the suddenness, the cruelty, the feeling of being disposable. And every case fueled my resolve. At night, I'd walk back to Professor Wilkins's house exhausted, but the exhaustion felt different from the numbness of before. It wasn't despair anymore, it was purpose. Sometimes as I sat at my borrowed desk at Riverton, late into the evening, surrounded by piles of affidavits and eviction notices, I felt a strange calm. This fight for people discarded by the system was where I belonged. It was still painful. I still woke some nights aching for a mother's call or dreaming of my brother's laugh. But the ache no longer defined me. It simply reminded me why I was here. Because while my own family had turned me away, I had found a new one in unexpected places. A professor who gave me shelter, attorneys who trusted my instincts, and clients who taught me that resilience wasn't about avoiding loss. It was about transforming it. And one evening, while sorting through case notes under the flicker of a desk lamp, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the start of something bigger. The internship at Riverton Law Partners quickly became more than just a line on my resume. It became a mirror reflecting back the injustice I had lived through. Every morning, I walked into that building carrying both my case files and the invisible weight of my own story. And every client who sat across from me reminded me of that motel room, of those garbage bags left on the porch like a cruel farewell. One day I met 3 families from the same apartment complex who had all been served simultaneous eviction notices. They had kids' pets, jobs that barely covered rent, and now they were being told they had 2 weeks in a cheap motel before the bulldozers came. I sat in a cramped conference room with them for hours, scribbling notes, passing tissues, and trying not to let my voice shake as I explained what little the law could offer. When they left, I remained at the table long after, surrounded by empty coffee cups and tear-stained paperwork. Eleanor found me there at 9 in the evening. She leaned against the doorway and asked, burning the midnight oil. I looked up at her, exhausted, my voice breaking. These families have nowhere to go. 2 weeks in a motel isn't a solution, it's a sentence. She sighed, her expression both weary and knowing. Unfortunately, that's often more than the law requires. Her words struck me like ice, more than the law requires. So the law itself was broken. If this was justice, then justice wasn't enough. For days after that, the question echoed in my mind. What am I going to do about it? I was just a second-year pre-law student. I had no money, no power, no connections. But I had lived through displacement, and I refused to let my pain remain meaningless. That's when an idea began to form. I attended a university financial aid seminar almost out of obligation, and there I heard something that felt like a spark hitting gasoline. The presenter mentioned social innovation grants, seed money for student projects addressing community needs. My pen froze above the page. This was it. This was my opening. That night, I stayed up until dawn drafting my first proposal. I called it the Safe Space Initiative, a program designed to provide housing advocacy for students and low-income families facing eviction. My fingers ached, my eyes burned, but my heart felt alive in a way it hadn't since before that empty house in Bakersfield. Over tea the next day, I showed my draft to Professor Wilkins. She adjusted her glasses and read silently, then looked up with a small smile. "This is good, Jasmine. Very good. Let's refine it." Eleanor later added her own insights, helping me shape the legal backbone of the project. For the first time, I realized I wasn't doing this alone. People believed in me. They wanted to help. And maybe that's why I want to pause here and ask you something. If you had the chance to turn your worst wound into a mission that could change lives, would you take it? Or would you bury that pain, hoping it fades away? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious what you would do. Because I know so many of us carry scars that could either destroy us or drive us to build something bigger. Back then, I didn't know if the Safe Space Initiative would work. The grant deadline was only 2 weeks away, and I was running on nothing but adrenaline and determination. But as I sat at that oak dining table again, surrounded by pages of statutes, case studies, and handwritten drafts, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. For the first time since my parents' betrayal, I wasn't just surviving, I was creating. And creation is the most powerful form of defiance. The following 2 weeks felt like a marathon I hadn't trained for, but I ran it anyway. Every waking hour, I poured myself into shaping the Safe Space Initiative, into something that looked bigger than just a desperate student's dream. I researched statistics on housing insecurity among students, dug into case law, interviewed classmates who had faced predatory landlords, and typed until my fingers felt raw. Sleep became optional. Coffee became survival. But every late night, I could feel the idea growing stronger. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about students like Devin, who came back from winter break to find his room rented out to someone else, despite his lease being paid. This was about families evicted for profit. It was about refusing to let anyone else stand on a porch, staring at their life stuffed in trash bags. When the application deadline arrived, I submitted my proposal with trembling hands. The document was rough around the edges, but it carried my heart. Then came the waiting. Days stretched like months, filled with restless pacing, second-guessing, and the constant fear of rejection. And then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. I opened the email, and there it was. Safe Space Initiative had been awarded $25,000. I sat frozen in the Riverton office break room, staring at the screen, tears welling in my eyes. $25,000. Not just money validation, proof that my pain had been transformed into something the world saw value in. I rushed to tell Professor Wilkins, who hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. Later, Eleanor clasped my shoulders and said, "Now the real work begins." And she was right. That summer, Safe Space Initiative went from an idea on paper to a living, breathing program. We operated out of a converted storage room at Riverton. It smelled faintly of dust and copier toner, but to me it was holy ground. I recruited 2 volunteer paralegals and a handful of law students who needed clinical hours. Together, we answered calls, filed paperwork, and counseled terrified students who thought they had nowhere to turn. By January, we had already assisted 23 students in fighting wrongful evictions. Each victory, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of the dignity I had lost on that porch in Bakersfield. Every time a student walked out of our office with their housing secure, it was as if I was rewriting my own story. But the calls from my family had begun again. 6 months after they abandoned me, my phone lit up with my father's number. The voicemail he left was short. "Your mother is worried. Call us." There was no apology, no explanation, just the expectation that I would obey like I always had. I didn't call back. 3 days later, another voicemail. This time his tone was sharper. "This silent treatment is childish, Jasmine. We are your family." I saved the message, but still didn't respond. Soon the calls multiplied sometimes. My father, sometimes my mother, occasionally even my brother. The tones ranged from pleading to demanding, but none of them acknowledged what they had done. None of them said the words I needed most. "We are sorry." And that silence told me everything I needed to know. So I blocked them. Not just my parents, but my brother too, even the aunts and uncles who might try to intervene. I had to protect the fragile foundation I was building. If anyone asked about my family, I kept it simple. We're not in touch. No dramatic story, no begging for sympathy, just a clean break. Because safe space was my new foundation now. And unlike my parents, it wasn't built on empty promises. It was built on purpose. The more Safe Space initiative grew, the more alive I felt. What had started as desperation in a dusty storage room began to bloom into something powerful. Students came to us terrified, holding eviction notices like death sentences, and they left with hope. Families who thought no one would listen suddenly had someone fighting for them. Each win wasn't just paperwork, it was survival dignity and proof that people like us mattered. By February, my days were a blur of classes in the morning, intake interviews in the afternoon, and case reviews late into the night. I lived on coffee and adrenaline. There were times when I collapsed into bed still wearing the clothes I'd worn all day. And yet, exhaustion never drowned me. It fueled me. Every family we helped was another reminder that I was building something my parents could never take away. But while Safe Space thrived, the calls from my family became relentless. My phone buzzed at all hours with numbers I recognized but refused to answer. Sometimes it was my father's gruff voice, leaving messages demanding I stop being childish. Other times it was my mother's softer tone, pleading that, "I remember we're still your parents." Once even Gabriel called his voice awkward, caught between loyalty and guilt. I ignored them all. I had to. Forgiveness requires acknowledgement, and none of them had admitted what they had done. They wanted reconciliation without accountability, reunion without remorse, and I wasn't going to hand them that. Then came the moment that almost cracked my resolve. I was in the middle of counseling a sophomore named Devin, who had returned from winter break only to find his landlord had illegally rented his room to someone else. As I explained his legal options, the office phone rang. I answered out of habit. "Safe Space Initiative, this is Jasmine." The silence that followed chilled me. Then a voice I knew too well, "Jasmine. Is that you?" It was my mother. My stomach dropped. "How did you get this number?" I asked sharply. "It's on your website," she said quickly. "Why haven't you returned our calls? We've been worried sick." I could feel Devin shifting uncomfortably in his chair. I covered the receiver, whispering, "I'm sorry. Can you wait outside for a moment?" He nodded and left the room. I uncovered the phone, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "This is my workplace. Please don't call here again." Her voice broke. "We're your parents. We have the right." The anger I had buried for months surged up. "You lost that right," I snapped. "When you put my belongings in garbage bags and sold our house without telling me you lost it." There was a pause, then her voice softened into something I hadn't expected. "Your father made a mistake. We had financial troubles. The house was being foreclosed on. We were embarrassed. We didn't know how to tell you." For the first time, doubt cracked through my armor. Foreclosure, financial troubles. They had never said a word about money problems, and I had been sending scholarship money home every month. "If you were in trouble, you could have told me," I said, my voice trembling. "I would have helped." "Your father wouldn't allow it," she whispered. "His pride. You know how he is." And I did know. My father's pride was legendary, an immovable force that shaped every decision he made. But pride didn't justify betrayal. Pride didn't excuse abandonment. I forced my voice firm. I need to get back to work. Please respect my boundaries. And I hung up before she could say another word. But when I set the receiver down, my hands shook. Her explanation had planted something dangerous inside me, doubt. What if they really had been desperate? What if it wasn't cruelty but shame? That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words, the sound of her voice breaking the plea hidden between excuses. For months I had built my strength on the certainty of their betrayal. Now uncertainty gnawed at me, and yet, somewhere in my gut I felt there was more to the story, something they weren't telling me. And what I discovered next would shatter every illusion left. The phone call with my mother lingered in my head like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Her words echoed foreclosure, financial troubles, embarrassment. For nights I lay awake wondering if I had been too harsh, if maybe I had misjudged the situation. Was their silence cruelty or shame? Had I been blind to their suffering? But then a memory surfaced me, sending part of my scholarship money home every month, never missing, even when it meant skipping meals. If they were drowning, why hadn't they told me? Why had they accepted my help and still abandoned me? I tried to bury the questions, but they scratched at me until I couldn't focus. My work at Safe Space usually anchored me, but now I found myself distracted during intake interviews. While clients described their battles with landlords, my thoughts wandered back to that one-word foreclosure. One evening, Eleanor noticed me staring at the call log instead of the stack of files in front of me. "You seem distracted," she said, her tone gentle but firm. I sighed and told her about the call. Part of me wants to believe they had a good reason, I admitted. That it wasn't just cruelty. Eleanor studied me for a long moment, then said, "People rarely act from pure cruelty. But reasons and excuses aren't the same thing. Whatever financial troubles they had, they chose to handle it by abandoning you without warning. That's the truth you can't forget." Her words cut through my haze, but they didn't erase the seed of doubt. It grew quietly, whispering, "What if?" And finally, against my better judgment, I caved. I searched for my family online. The results came fast, and what I found shattered every fragile strand of sympathy I had been weaving. A cheerful Facebook post from my mother dated just 3 weeks after they moved. She stood with my father and Gabriel in front of a new house, all of them smiling. The caption read, "New beginnings. So blessed." My chest tightened. No mention of foreclosure, no sign of struggle, no trace of shame. They weren't broken, they weren't desperate, they were celebrating. There had been no financial crisis. There had been no foreclosure. There had only been a choice, and that choice was to leave me behind. The betrayal burned all over again, hotter than before, because now I knew the truth. They had lied. They had pretended it was survival, when really it was convenience. I stared at the photo until the screen blurred with tears, and then I wiped them away, furious at myself for letting hope creep in again. That night I sat down at my desk and wrote a list. On one side, I wrote what they had said: foreclosure, shame, embarrassment. On the other side, I wrote what I had seen: a smiling family in front of a new house living their blessed life without me. The second list outweighed the first, and that was the moment I knew there was no going back. But I want to stop here and ask you something. If you discovered your family had lied about why they abandoned you, would you give them another chance? Or would you close the door forever? I'm genuinely curious. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your answer might help someone who's standing at that crossroads right now. For me, the answer became clear. I would not chase them. I would not let their lies become my chains. Still, the unanswered calls piled up like falling snow. 120, 150, 200. Messages filled with demands, please, even casual updates, as if we were still a normal family. Gabriel got into community college. The neighbors brought tamales. The new house is wonderful. Each voicemail was salt in a wound that refused to close. They were living their new life, celebrating milestones, while I was still piecing myself together from the wreckage they left behind. But even as their voices haunted me, Safe Space was growing faster than ever. A local news station ran a feature on our work. The university paper followed with a profile. Our phone rang constantly, our files overflowed, and our name began to spread. Their absence was still a scar, but my purpose, my fight was becoming stronger than my pain, and soon that purpose would be tested in a way I could never have imagined. Safe Space Initiative was no longer a fragile idea scribbled in my notebook. It had become real, loud, demanding, and alive. The local news story had sparked something bigger than I could have imagined. Calls poured in from students across the city. A sophomore whose landlord tried to evict him mid-lease. A single mom juggling 2 jobs while fighting an illegal rent increase. Even graduate students with families who had been tricked into signing predatory contracts. We were drowning in cases, and yet everyone felt like oxygen. Every intake interview reminded me why I kept fighting. Each time a tenant left our office, clutching hope instead of despair, I felt a victory not just for them, but for the abandoned girl inside me who had once stood before a house with her life in garbage bags. But growth comes with new problems. Our storage room office was bursting. Files piled up on chairs, intake forms covered the floor, and volunteers squeezed shoulder to shoulder at the one working table. I looked around one night at the chaos and whispered to Eleanor, "We need more. More resources, more space, more funding." She nodded, her expression calm but serious. There might be a way. The Watkins Foundation is accepting proposals for their annual social justice grants. It's competitive, but if we win, it could transform everything. We're talking staff offices, long-term stability. Her words electrified me. The Watkins Foundation wasn't just funding, it was legitimacy. Their name carried weight across the state. If Safe Space could secure their support, we wouldn't just survive, we would thrive. I threw myself into the application with a level of intensity that startled even me. Days blurred into nights as I compiled data, wrote testimonials, and crafted a 47-page document detailing our mission methodology and measurable impact. I begged clients for statements, reached out to professors for endorsements, and obsessed over every comma. And yet while I worked, the calls from my family continued. They had grown bolder, more frequent. Sometimes 5, 6, 7 a day. They left voicemails as if nothing had happened, updating me on Gabriel's classes, on neighborhood gossip, even on what they cooked for dinner. The casual tone infuriated me more than their initial cruelty. They weren't apologizing. They weren't acknowledging what they'd done. They were pretending I was still part of their life, when in reality they had carved me out long ago. The contrast was dizzying. Inside the Safe Space office, I was fighting for justice, surrounded by allies who valued me. Outside, my own family was gaslighting me through voicemails. 2 realities pulling me in opposite directions. But I chose. Every time, I chose Safe Space. And slowly, my family began to look different. It was Eleanor reviewing legal strategy late into the night. It was the volunteers who showed up every week, ready to give their time for nothing but the hope of helping. It was the students who hugged me with tears in their eyes, when they realized they wouldn't lose their homes. That was my family now. And then came the call that would shift everything again. It was from an unfamiliar number with my hometown's area code. I hesitated before answering, bracing for my father's voice. But instead, it was Mrs. Hernandez, our old neighbor. Her tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "Your brother gave me your number. He thought you wouldn't answer if you saw their names." My defenses rose immediately. If this is about reconnecting with my parents... No, she interrupted. It's about the house. Someone broke in last night. The police think they were looking for valuables. But the intruder left something behind, an envelope with your name on it. I froze. An envelope. Yes, the police gave it to me since I'm watching the property. It looks official, Jasmine. There's a law firm's name on it. My pulse raced. Official documents at my old address. That made no sense. I had updated my information months ago. "Can you open it?" I asked. "Please just tell me what it says." I heard the sound of paper tearing, then silence. When Mrs. Hernandez finally spoke, her voice trembled. "It's about your grandmother's estate." "Jasmine, it says you've inherited property in Oaxaca, and there's a bank statement. It shows a balance of over $400,000. The world tilted. My grandmother had died when I was 13. She lived simply, no one ever mentioned wealth. And yet here it was, a fortune, mine. My throat tightened. When was this finalized? I heard her shuffling papers again. Last March. Last March, 1 month before my parents abandoned me. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. My parents had known. They had known all along. And suddenly, every unanswered call, every casual voicemail, every fake plea made sense in a way that broke me all over again. This wasn't about shame. This wasn't about foreclosure. This was about money. The discovery of my grandmother's inheritance detonated inside me like a bomb I hadn't seen coming. $400,000, property in Oaxaca, resort condominiums developed years after her death, and all of it finalized last March, exactly 1 month before my parents packed up, sold the house, and left me on the porch with garbage bags. The timing couldn't be coincidence. I sat in my office at Safe Space that evening, the envelope spread out in front of me, my fingers trembling as I reread the words again and again. My parents had known. They had been contacted as my legal guardians when I was 19. They chose not to tell me. They chose to walk away. Suddenly their desperate voicemails made sense. Not desperation for me, but desperation for access to the money. Their calls weren't about love. They were about leverage. I told Eleanor and Professor Wilkins over dinner. Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Have you considered why they didn't tell you? Because they wanted it for themselves, I spat bitterly. She leaned back thoughtful, perhaps. Or maybe they wanted to control the timing, to make you grateful, dependent. The words lodged in my chest. Control, gratitude, dependency. Yes, that sounded like them. My father's pride, my mother's quiet compliance, Gabriel's smirk as he skated by without consequences. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. Or maybe they never planned to tell me at all. The inheritance hit my account 3 days before the Watkins Foundation presentation. Seeing that balance in black and white was surreal. For the first time since standing on that porch, I felt financially free from them. Their chains had broken. But freedom comes with a price. Choices. What would I do with this money? Should I invest it in Safe Space? Save it for myself? Use it to bury the last ties to my family? The questions circled me like vultures. Meanwhile, the Watkins presentation loomed. It was the biggest opportunity of my life. If Safe Space secured that grant, we could expand beyond the university and reach the broader community. The proposal we submitted asked for $300,000 over 3 years. Enough to turn our scrappy team into a legitimate nonprofit. I prepared obsessively. Every slide was polished, every statistic memorized, every story carefully chosen to humanize our work. Eleanor coached me on legal framing. Professor Wilkins drilled me on delivery. By the morning of the presentation, I felt as ready as I could be. But I couldn't silence the gnawing thought my family might not be finished with me yet. And I was right. We arrived at the Watkins Foundation offices, sleek and imposing, with glass walls that reflected the city skyline. Eleanor looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, calm as ever. I wore a navy blazer I had borrowed, standing straighter than I felt. Inside the boardroom, 8 people sat around a polished table. Local business leaders, philanthropists, a former judge, even William Watkins himself. My palms sweated as I connected my laptop to the projector. I began to speak. 20 minutes in my voice, steadied passion carrying me. I told them about Devon, the sophomore nearly homeless mid-semester, about the young mother who clutched her baby as she faced eviction, about how Safe Space turned desperation into dignity. I saw heads nod, pens scribbling notes. My heart lifted. Then the boardroom door opened. A foundation assistant whispered something into Mr. Watkins's ear. He frowned, then turned to me. I apologize for the interruption, Ms. Rojas, but there are some people here claiming to be your family. They're quite insistent on speaking with you. My breath caught. Family, of course. He continued, uncomfortable. We can ask them to wait until we finish if you prefer. Eleanor placed a steady hand on my arm. Your call, Jasmine? My mind spun. After months of ignoring their voicemails, after discovering the inheritance they'd hidden, they had chosen this moment, the most important of my career, to confront me. The timing couldn't be worse, which meant it was deliberate. I inhaled slowly, forcing calm. Please tell them I'll speak with them after the presentation, I said. My voice didn't even shake. Mr. Watkins nodded approvingly. The assistant left. But inside, my pulse pounded like a war drum. because I knew whatever they had to say, it wasn't about reconciliation, it was about money. And what happened after that boardroom door closed changed everything. The moment Mr. Watkins closed the boardroom door, I forced myself to focus. My slides glowed on the screen, but my mind was racing. My parents and brother were sitting in the reception area just a few feet away, waiting to pounce the second I stepped out. Still, I pushed through. I spoke about safe space as if my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I described our journey from a dusty storage room to a program that had already saved 23 students from wrongful eviction. I showed the board how each case wasn't just paperwork, but human dignity restored. When the questions came, I answered them with steady confidence. My voice never cracked. My posture never faltered. Inside, I was trembling, but on the outside, I looked like steel. And when the presentation ended, the room filled with nods of approval. Mr. Watkins himself shook my hand. "You were excellent," he said. But the second I stepped out into the reception area, reality crashed back in. There they were. My mother stood first, her face caught between hope and fear. My father sat stiffly, his expression guarded, almost defiant. Gabriel hovered near the wall, his hands shoved in his pockets, eyes darting anywhere but mine. "Jasmine," my mother began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Eleanor squeezed my shoulder. "Call me later," she whispered, leaving me alone to face the ghosts I had tried so hard to bury. I kept my distance, arms crossed. "Why are you here? How did you even find me?" My mother clasped her hands together like she was praying. "We saw the newspaper article about your housing program. It mentioned the Watkins presentation today. We've been trying to reach you for months." I let out a short, bitter laugh. 247 calls, hard to miss. My father finally stood, his jaw set. "This has gone on long enough. You're being childish." The word stabbed me. Childish. As if being abandoned, lied to, erased was something I was supposed to shrug off. I met his eyes, my voice sharp. "Childish. I came home to find my life in garbage bags. You sold our house without telling me. You abandoned me, and I'm the childish one." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We made a mistake. We want to make it right." "Now you want to make it right?" My laugh was hollow. "After a year, after I rebuilt everything without you, why now?" Gabriel finally spoke, his voice low. "Just hear them out, Jazz." I turned to him, my gaze ice. "I know about the inheritance." The words hung in the air like a blade. My father's face darkened. My mother's eyes widened. Gabriel froze. "That's why you're here, isn't it?" I pressed. "Because the money came through." "You've always been so quick to judge," my father snapped. "And you've always been so quick to discard," I fired back. Silence wrapped around us, thick and suffocating. For the first time, they had nothing to say. I looked at them, these people who had shaped my childhood, who had once tucked me in at night, who had turned their backs without hesitation. They wanted something from me, but they weren't going to get it. I stood tall, feeling the strength of every case I had fought, every student I had defended. Family doesn't throw your life into garbage bags. Family doesn't erase you for convenience. Whatever you want now, I'm not sure I care to hear it. Their faces blurred as I turned away, my decision already made. But before I go on, let me ask you something. If your parents abandoned you, then came back only after discovering you had money, would you sit down and listen, or would you walk away? Share your answer below. Your perspective might help someone else who's fighting the same battle. And if stories of resilience and truth matter to you, subscribe now, because what comes next will leave you breathless. I did sit down with them eventually, but not out of love, out of curiosity, out of a need to face them on my own terms. And what they revealed at that coffee shop only deepened the wound and confirmed that some betrayals can never be undone. We relocated to a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away, the kind of place where steam fogged the windows and the scent of roasted beans clung to the air. I chose a table near the back, making sure there was enough space between us so I wouldn't feel cornered. My mother sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a cup she never touched. My father lowered himself into the chair beside her, posture stiff, while Gabriel hovered unsure, shifting from foot to foot before finally sitting down. The silence was suffocating until my mother finally spoke. We were ashamed, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The foreclosure. Your father lost his job, and I couldn't make enough cleaning houses. We couldn't tell you. Her words struck me, but I kept my voice calm. So instead of asking for help, you abandoned me. My father's jaw tightened. We found out about your grandmother's money right after you left for spring semester. The lawyers said you'd inherit when you turned 21. We thought he paused, searching for words. We thought if we moved, started over somewhere new, we could fix our finances before you found out. I stared at him unblinking. By selling the house and leaving me with nothing, my mother's eyes filled with tears. We panicked. Your father thought you'd be better off without our problems. You had your scholarship, your university friends. I leaned forward, my voice steady, razor sharp. And now, why the sudden change of heart? They exchanged glances, the kind that spoke volumes of guilt. Finally, Gabriel broke the silence. They made a terrible mistake, Jazz. They know that now. The safe space thing, my father added, his tone gruff. In the newspaper, we saw what you've accomplished, and we realized we'd lost something precious. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your successful daughter, I translated, bitterness dripping from every syllable. No, my mother insisted, quickly shaking her head. Our family, our connection. But her words rang hollow. I studied them, the gray threading through my mother's dark hair, the slump in my father's once proud shoulders, the awkward uncertainty in Gabriel's eyes. For a moment, I almost felt pity, almost. But then the memory of garbage bags on the porch came rushing back, burning through any sympathy. I've built a new life, I said finally, each word deliberate. New connections. People who value me regardless of my accomplishments. My father leaned forward, eyes blazing. We're still your family. I held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Family doesn't put your belongings in garbage bags. Silence fell over the table, heavy and final. I reached into my purse, pulled out a 20, and placed it on the table to cover the untouched drinks. Then I stood my chair, scraping against the floor. I don't need closure, I told them. I've already moved forward. But if you truly want to make amends, start by respecting my boundaries. I turned and walked out before they could respond, the cold air outside rushing into my lungs like freedom. My hands trembled, but my spine stayed straight. For the first time, I had faced them, not as the abandoned daughter begging for answers, but as someone who had reclaimed her own power. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but beneath it was something stronger, resolve. Because walking away from them wasn't weakness, it was survival. It was choosing myself. And I would carry that choice into the next chapter of my life, one that was about to change forever. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. For a split second, I almost ignored it, bracing myself for yet another relative trying to convince me to be reasonable. But this call was different. When I answered, a calm voice introduced himself as a representative from the Watkins Foundation. Congratulations, he said. Safe Space Initiative has been awarded the full grant amount you requested, $300,000 over 3 years, plus an additional $50,000 for operational expenses. I sat frozen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The world around me seemed to blur as those words sank in. We hadn't just won funding, we had secured a future. I called Eleanor immediately. She answered on the first ring, and when I told her, her cheer rang so loudly I had to pull the phone back from my ear. Later, we gathered our small team in the dusty storage room we had called an office. Tears filled my eyes as I told them the news. We did it, I whispered. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building. The momentum didn't stop there. Just 2 weeks later, a national news outlet reached out. They wanted to feature Safe Space in a segment on innovative approaches to housing justice. Cameras came, interviews were filmed, and for the first time, our work was broadcast to millions. Students I'd helped messaged me saying, I saw you on TV. Thank you for fighting for us. And yes, my parents watched that broadcast. I didn't need them to tell me. I knew. Because after the story aired, the calls stopped. The endless voicemails, the desperate messages, the casual updates pretending nothing had happened, all of it ended. They had finally seen me on my terms and my strength and realized I was no longer theirs to control. I won't lie. Part of me grieved. Not for them, but for the dream of family I once believed in. But grief gave way to clarity. Sometimes the family you build yourself is stronger than the one you're born into. Sometimes blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, but choice does. Safe space became my chosen family. Professor Wilkins, who gave me shelter when I had none. Eleanor, who believed in my voice when I doubted it myself. The students and families who trusted me with their stories. These were my people. This was my home. Looking back, the image of those garbage bags on the porch still haunts me. But now they don't symbolize abandonment. They symbolize the beginning. The moment I stopped living for their approval and started building my own foundation. And as I look toward the future, I know this: I will never again measure my worth through someone else's eyes. But let me leave you with this question. If you were in my place, abandoned, betrayed, then handed the power to rebuild, what would you do with it? Would you forgive and return, or would you choose yourself and step forward into something new? Tell me your answer in the comments. I want to hear your perspective because your story might help someone else find their own strength. And if this journey resonated with you, if you believe in resilience and reclaiming your life after betrayal, make sure you subscribe. More stories like this are waiting, and you don't want to miss them. Because sometimes survival isn't the ending. It's only the beginning of the story you were meant to write. There are moments in life that split your story into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment was standing on the porch of my childhood home, staring at garbage bags filled with the pieces of my life. At the time, I thought it was the end, but now I see it was the beginning. The journey that followed was not easy. It was nights of loneliness, mornings of doubt, and days where the weight of betrayal felt unbearable. But it was also the spark that lit Safe Space Initiative. It was the push that carried me toward mentors who became family, and toward a mission that gave meaning to my pain. I've learned that sometimes the people you expect to protect you are the ones who cut you deepest. And sometimes the ones who have no obligation at all are the ones who show up, hold you steady, and remind you of your worth. Family is not always defined by blood. Family is the circle you build with love, loyalty, and respect. As Safe Space grew, so did I. I stopped measuring myself through the lens of abandonment and started seeing myself through the lives. We changed the students who stayed in their homes, the families who could sleep without fear of eviction. That was my mirror. That was my proof. If you've ever felt discarded, if you've ever been told you're not enough, let my story remind you being left behind does not mean you are broken. Sometimes it means you've been freed to write a story that is fully yours. So when I look back at that day on the porch, I no longer see loss. I see the seed of everything I have built since. And as I move forward, I carry this truth with me. My worth was never theirs to decide. It has always been mine. And it always will be.